on cookies really is quite onerous, and we recognise that. That, you know, other than in exceptional circumstances, cookies cannot be used without the consent of the user. Now, these provisions were really driven by concern about online behavioural advertising, tracking people on the internet. And so, if you come to looking at what is a breach and what isn't, and where we use our powers to bring about compliance with the law, we're going to be much more driven to ensure that there is compliance, where we're talking about things like online behavioural advertising, tracking people's movements across different websites, because that's what the law was aimed at, rather than things like the deployment of analytical cookies, even though those are caught by the same law. So what I can't do is, you know, give a green light and say the law is quite flexible here, it gives you a lot of scope to do things differently. The law is actually quite tight on the requirement for consent, but we will take a practical and proportionate approach to enforcement. You know, so the message is, the more intrusive into someone's privacy the cookies you deploy are, you know, the more you need to act quickly to put measures into place. And we are very pleased, and Nick referred to see some good practice solutions emerging. And some you can already see. We're also conscious that there are some big businesses which have seen what seem to us to be very good solutions up their sleeves, just waiting to launch them. There's a bit of a question of who's going to take the first plunge, but there will be good practice. But this 12-month period does end in May. We're not going to, you know, leap suddenly into enforcement, but there will be the possibility of us taking enforcement where we get complaints about the deployment of cookies, particularly that are privacy intrusive, and particularly where the organisation concerned isn't taking any steps to comply with what is now, and has been for a year, a legal requirement. So if I can just leave you with a closing message, because I think there is a closing message about the cookies provisions, because they were introduced in the European Parliament at a very late stage in the negotiating process. And they were, we think, intended to address online behavioural advertising. But actually they've caught a lot more. And maybe if everyone had been a bit more alert, and particularly alert to the role the Parliament now has, someone could have jumped up and down, waved a flag and said, hang on, these proposals aren't quite right. There's a better way of addressing the problem. So there is this message, and I'm sure you could put it into a much snappier phrase than I can. But as we've got these wider data protection proposals going through over the next year or two, do keep a very close watch on them and step in if you think there are things developing which will cause business problems. Don't get caught again. And I think I'd also just take your other message, Nick. You said, you know, data should be used responsibly and transparently to empower consumers. And I think there was a feeling, certainly in the European Parliament, you know, with behavioural advertising the way it was going, that wasn't what was happening. And therefore there was this reaction.